So recently I went out of town for about a week, and I didn't really have anybody at my house that knew how to take care of houseplants, so I had to make sure I could do what I could before I left to make sure they wouldn't die. And I know it's only a week, so I wasn't particularly extremely concerned about any of my plants because they usually go quite a while without really being tended to or anything like that. It's just usually like regular checkups and all that, but not really much active care. But even with that being said, there was still quite a few things that I did before I left to make sure that my plants would all be happy and healthy when I came back. So first, before you leave, you need to check all your plants to make sure they don't have any pests, because if there's pests before you leave, they're gonna get way worse and your plant might be completely overrun and then overrun plants next to it if it goes untreated while you're gone. So luckily none of mine had pests, which I was very, very grateful for. So I didn't have to worry about necessarily quarantining any of them or using neem oil or anything like that to treat them before I left. But while I was doing this, I noticed that I needed to wipe down the leaves of a lot of them, and you should just do that anyways before you leave on a big trip. So for example, this Birkin right in front of me gets very dusty very quickly, so I had to make sure I wiped down his leaves very, very well, top and bottom and all that sort of stuff before I left, because otherwise when I got back it would have been too late and it would have needed dusting 2 times over basically. So big plants like that, you definitely want to make sure you wipe down the leaves before you leave, because if you don't, you are putting it at greater risk of getting pests while you're gone. And that just won't be very good for you to come back to, because nobody wants to take care of bugs right when they get back from a vacation. Some of my plants do need watering about every week, if not twice a week, and maybe more depending on the weather. So that was my main concern really when I was leaving, was how am I gonna water them and how am I gonna take care of that, because I don't really, like I've said in past videos, I don't follow a set watering schedule just because I don't think that's good for plants. I have a lot of propagations and I change those waters out weekly just because they're on windowsills, so the water levels go down really fast. But I didn't have anybody to check on those for me. So I was thinking, if there was any ways to get around it, ways to water it while I was gone and all that sort of stuff. And some people say to keep them in a bathtub with a little bit of water underneath, but I just find that puts my plants at risk of getting overwatered while I'm gone. So what I did was the day before, I just went through and checked every single plant that I had. And I know for some people that's a lot more than I have. But if that's the case, then just check a couple days before. But I went through and checked all my plants and their water levels to see how much water they needed and if they even needed water and just all that sort of stuff. Because some of them, just with the cycle of watering, had already gotten watered a couple days prior to me leaving. And were kind of getting dried out, but they were still just pretty much wet. But I basically set aside, and I tried to clear up as much as possible. I did work the day before I left, but I tried to set up as much as possible a full day of pruning and cleaning and watering, basically. So just doing everything that I would to take care of plants, even if that's a couple days before. But luckily I had a bit of time in the night right before I left, and I ended up doing everything basically that night. But if you have a lot of plants in your collection, I definitely recommend doing it a solid day before at least. So what I did was I got all my plants together and I watered all of the ones that needed it, normally needed it, and then also the ones that kind of needed a bit of water that, weren't soaking, but they weren't completely dry. This is if you've seen my toothpick hack that I do to check the water on my plants, this was the ones that were about halfway dry. I ended up watering those as well just because I knew they would need water in a couple days just by knowing my plants and what they typically need. So I knew they would need water in a couple days, so I just gave it a drink first, because honestly overwatering your plants once isn't going to kill them. It's usually just continuously overwatering. So if you do once for the sake of, you're going out of town or something like that, that usually will not kill them. They might lose a leaf or so, but that's not gonna completely send the plant to its grave. So that you should be fine with that. I was just very wary because I had never left my plants before. So there were a few plants that I was a bit more concerned about in terms of watering, just because they had been a bit finicky lately, or they were newer, or just, they were some of my favorite plants. So I just didn't want to take any chances. And one of those is actually my micans. And so what I did with my micans, and it's still like that right now, is I popped it out of its soil that it had, rinsed it all off, and I put it in water. And I know this shocks some plants, it shocks all plants just because it's a change of environment. But for my micans, it's it's never been happier, honestly. It's been really liking it in the water, which is why I haven't taken it out yet. But I just put it in a normal like glass vase. And I did that so I wouldn't have to water it while I was gone, and I wouldn't have to have anybody water it either. And it just wouldn't get root rot that way, and I would come back and it'd be completely healthy, and I could repot it if I wanted to. And that's one that I recommend you do if your plant can take it, because obviously some plants just do not handle that very well. But that's something that I actually recommend you do if you have a plant that you're a bit more worried about and you just don't want to leave for that long and if they need a bit more continuous watering, I suggest you do that with the plant. Because it's kind of just like propagations, you know. I have propagations that have some super long roots and I just keep them in there because I know that I won't have to deal with them, or I don't have pots and stuff. But if I keep them in water, I won't have to continuously water them and worry about their roots going rotten or anything like that. So after I gathered up all my plants and kind of watered the ones that really needed it, and then took my favorite plants out and put them in water, like my micans, I checked just like their foliage for any dead bits or anything that needed to be pruned off. Because I usually keep up with that pretty well. Like, I don't really let a lot of dead leaves and all that sort of stuff accumulate on my plants just because it attracts bugs, and I cannot stand bugs on my houseplants. But I got them all together, and while I was watering, so this is kind of all done at the same time. It's not necessarily you have to go in like stages, but it's kind of as each plant comes, I kind of took care of it and did what I needed to. But as I was watering, I was also checking the foliage for dead leaves and all that sort of stuff, and just going through and trimming the ones that I needed to trim. And then after I finished trimming everything up and checking all the water and moving, you know, the plants that I needed to into water so they could, you know, stay healthy while I was gone, I went on to check my propagations, because I always have at least 5 propagations going at a time. So all my propagations are in water. I don't really do any in perlite or soil or anything like that right now. So they're all just in little containers with water in them, and I went through and checked all of them to make sure, you know, there wasn't any rotting bits in there, because sometimes, you know, cuttings do start to rot instead of root, and you just have to throw those out when that happens. It's unfortunate, but it just does happen sometimes. But I went through and checked every single one, kind of gave them a good rinse, because, you know, they kind of get that film over it and it's just not good, so you need to rinse them periodically as well. And I usually change the water weekly, like I said, but I didn't know when I had last changed the water, because I change them all at different times, since I kind of, it's not on a set schedule, like I've said a million times. But since they all, like, maybe one had been changed the day before, I just wasn't sure, so I just changed all of the water right before I left so they would be good to go. And I just made sure that I had enough space in there for all of them. This is my peperomia propagations that I have. And there's just like a lot of different cuttings in here. Anyways, I changed all the water in my propagations and just made sure they're like all the way to the top, because sometimes I do it maybe like not all the way to the top, so about a ½ inch down, just because it's easier to move them and it's easier to put more plants in if I need to without the water overflowing. But since I wouldn't be here to check on them or change out the water, I made sure that I filled it all the way to the top, almost to the point of spilling over. That way that even if like the water evaporated a bit, there would still be enough in there for the plants to keep rooting and none of the roots to like dry out or anything like that. So those are really the main things that you need to do when you do go out of town. I am gonna be going out of town for 3 weeks. So we'll see how they hold up after that. But what ended up happening with my plants after I left the week, after doing all that stuff and taking care of all of them, was I was left with just a couple dead leaves. Basically, it was actually, where's that? Okay. It was on my Marble Queen pothos, and I have never had any issues with this one, like in terms of browning leaves and all that sort of stuff. And when I came back, there's a tip on here that's browned a bit, and then there was a yellow leaf, but I'm not sure if the yellow leaf would have happened even if I was here, because it was one of the oldest leaves. I mean, it was a massive leaf, but it was one of the oldest leaves on the plant. So I'm not sure if that was just something that would have happened anyways, but that is basically the one that I came home to that had a bit of damage on there. Also, my begonia had a lot of more like brown spots and everything. But I think that's because the humidity wasn't being controlled while I was here. And yeah, so that was a bit, just a lot of the damage on my begonia was from when I left, because I didn't have that control over the humidity, or like, you know, have humidifiers going constantly while I was gone, just because I couldn't control that while I was away. Oh, another thing you need to make sure you do, and this is actually a big thing, is if your plants sit by windows and stuff. I know when people leave their houses or leave their apartments, they don't like keeping the blinds open. You just need to make sure that you keep your plants in a spot where they can get enough light, so they're not basically sitting in a dungeon while you're gone the entire time, because that's when they will decline very quickly. Especially the plants that do need a higher light, and not low light plants like snake plants, they'll do fine. Like, you can leave them for a month and they'll be fine. But other plants are a bit more finicky, and you do need to leave them in a brighter spot, or have timed grow lights would work out too if you don't want to keep your windows open or any windows open. But move them, like if you have a bright bathroom, move them all in there so they can get a lot of light and be a bit happier. Because you don't want to keep them just in a dark room the entire time when you're gone, because that would be terrible. If you do want someone to come check out your plants though, I have a couple suggestions for things to leave them with so they don't end up making a mistake and potentially harming some of your plants when they're just trying to help out. So I would have a checklist for them, and this isn't necessarily like they have to actively do something for each checklist, but more so like actually checking, not necessarily doing. So it wouldn't necessarily be like, oh, water every single plant every day, but it would be like, go to each plant and check their leaves, check the underside, be very specific, especially if it's someone that doesn't know much about plants, like if it's just a random relative or something. Just be very specific with them what you want them to do, because if you don't know anything about plants, it's really hard to just kind of pick it up like that. So what you want to do is have a checklist for them, have them check, you know, maybe if you know your plants very well, some certain plants every day, have them do like this group this day, this group another day, or you can do all of them in one day. You wouldn't probably need them to come by every single day, but maybe just halfway through, if it's a week, 2 weeks, whatever, just have them stop by once or twice. But I would do a checklist, and if you're able to, include pictures of which plants you're talking about, because if I say micans to someone that doesn't know anything about plants, they're not gonna know what I'm talking about. And of course you can always FaceTime, and that would make it a lot easier. I know that the phone quality while you're on FaceTime is not the greatest, so you might not be able to actually like see anything. Like if one of your plants had bugs, you wouldn't be able to see if you're on FaceTime. So that's maybe where pictures come in handy, so people could take pictures, send them back to you, and send you just like the state that your plant is in, and you'll be able to diagnose it over the phone and like fix whatever needs to be fixed. And if you know about this trip beforehand, you can bring the people over, depending on how long you're gone and depending on how much effort you want to put into it. You can bring whoever's taking care of your plants over and show them, okay, this is what a plant looks like when it's thirsty, or this is how it's able to tell this. A lot easier way of doing that would be to get a moisture meter, and you can just stick that in your plants and they'll be able to see, oh, it's dry, I can water it now. And that way they don't have to like, it's a bit of a cheat sheet, so you don't have to actually physically feel if it is dry enough to water, or you don't have to like guess if the plant looks thirsty or anything like that. And then last, if you want someone to come check out your plants and like take care of them while you're gone, make sure that you take your plants that are maybe in a bit harder of a spot to get and put them in an easier access spot. For example, I have this Brazil philodendron behind me, and it's like completely wrapped around this column down here, and it's not like super hard to get off. But if someone's coming over to take care of my plants, I would rather take that off so they can take care of that and not have them like manhandle it and move it around, because if it accidentally snaps or something, I don't want them to feel bad because it's something that just happens, and I just don't want to put them in that position. But that's it, guys. Thanks so much for watching. If you guys are interested in a checklist for plant watching while you're away, or just in general, let me know down in the comments below. I'd be happy to share that with you guys, and just the one that I use. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, hit that like button and subscribe for more. See you later.